the Second World War. A global conflagration that had engulfed nations and reshaped human history. By 1941, the tide of battle was beginning to turn. Hitler, who had once exuded overconfidence, found his forces stretched thin. The brutal invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941 and the entry of the United States into the war that December forced a fundamental shift in German strategy. From aggressive offense, the Führer now focused on defense. He began to speak of Europe as an impregnable fortress. This was the genesis of what would become known as the Atlantic Wall. Initially, Hitler's vision was far from robust. Early coastal defenses in France were lacking, a situation driven by what was termed the Norway Scare. Hitler's belief that a separate invasion might occur in the north. However, events would soon accelerate the wall's construction. In June 1942, British and Canadian commandos launched a devastating raid on Dieppe. The heavy Canadian casualties shocked Hitler. He demanded a fanatical acceleration of the Atlantic Wall's construction. By November 1943, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel arrived in France to command these defences. His headquarters, the silent village and castle of La Roche-Guyon, belied the storm brewing within him. Rommel was consumed by a singular conviction. The decisive battle for Germany's fate would be fought on the beaches. His assessment, voiced to his aide, Captain Helmuth Lang, on April 22, 1944, was stark. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. Yet Rommel operated within a complex and often fractured German command structure. His ambiguous directive, known as the Gummerbefehl or Elastic Directive, allowed him to inspect defences and report directly to Hitler, bypassing Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the Commander-in-Chief West. This created an early tension in command, with von Rundstedt dismissively nicknaming Rommel Marshal Bubby, Marshal Laddie. For decades, the Atlantic Wall was portrayed as an impenetrable barrier. However, historical re-evaluation reveals a different truth. Rommel himself, upon his arrival, assessed it as a figment of Hitler's cloud cuckoo land. Von Rundstedt considered it an enormous bluff. By the end of 1943, more than 500,000 men were working on the wall, stretching nearly 3,000 miles from the Arctic Ocean to the Bay of Biscay. Rommel's forces manned 800 miles of this vast coastline from Holland to Brittany. Yet, even with 60 German divisions stationed in the west by D-Day, the defences suffered from a lack of heavy guns and steel, leading to restricted arcs of fire for bunkers and blockhouses. Rommel was aggressive. He oversaw the implementation of a formidable layered coastal defense system. The beaches were transformed into a fantastic jungle of obstacles and minefields. Jagged triangles of steel, saw-toothed gator-like structures of iron, metal-tipped wooden stakes and concrete cones. Over 5 million mines were planted, with plans for another 6 million, aiming for 60 million bedded. Over 500,000 lethal underwater obstacles were deployed, often strapped with mines or armed with shells pointing out to sea. Guns were hidden in concrete emplacements beneath seaside homes, aimed directly down the beaches. Even miniature robot tanks, called Goliaths, carrying over 0.5 ton of explosives, and automatic flamethrowers were positioned. Inland, low-lying areas were flooded and fields booby-trapped with heavy stakes and tripwires to deter parachutists. Allied deception, particularly extensive bombing campaigns, had successfully led German command to believe the Pas de Calais was the primary invasion point. This critical miscalculation would prove devastating. Now, the focus shifts to the Allied side. The D-Day invasion, Operation Overlord, was not just a military operation, but a pivotal, high-stakes gamble for the future of Germany and the liberation of Europe. Its success hinged on an almost unimaginable dependence on precise timing and favorable weather. General Dwight D. Day, General Dwight D. Day. Eisenhower, the Allied Supreme Commander, carried the immense burden of this decision. The meticulous, multifaceted planning involved thousands of personnel and unprecedented resources. By spring 1944, almost 2 million tons of goods and supplies had been delivered, 163 air bases constructed, 170 miles of new railroad lines laid, and almost 3 million Allied troops amassed under Eisenhower's command. Yet, this monumental undertaking was fraught with immense logistical challenges and critical security vulnerabilities. Code words like Overlord, Utah, Omaha, and Mulberry were inadvertently revealed in crossword puzzles compiled by a physics teacher, Leonard Sidney Darr. A practice flash from an AP teletype operator prematurely announced the landings. Even a German informant, Cicero, had provided early intelligence about Overlord to Berlin in January 1944. Amidst these vulnerabilities, the Channel weather presented a constant, unpredictable threat. The critical need for specific tidal and lunar conditions dictated a narrow window for the invasion. Eisenhower had decided D-Day would be one of 3 specific days in June. On June 4, 1944, the original target date, Eisenhower faced his agonizing decision. Adverse weather conditions forced a postponement of the invasion by 24 hours. This bought the Allies time, but also exposed them to potential German discovery. A convoy sailing from Plymouth, moving at less than 4 miles an hour, 40 miles from France, had to turn back, a logistical feat that underscored the precariousness of the timing. The scene was grim on the USS Corrie, as radioman third-class Benny Glisson intercepted the postponement message. The atmosphere among the troops was a mix of tension and apprehension. Private Arthur B. Dutch, Schultz of the 82nd Airborne, gambled away his winnings. Others reflected on family and mission targets. Corporal Reginald Dale of the British 3rd Division faced personal life changes. Captain John F. Tay, Dulligan of the 1st Infantry Division, penned a poignant letter to his wife, reflecting love, duty, and faith. Many endured extreme seasickness on the landing craft. On the German side, Rommel had assessed that the weather, combined with a late thaw in Russia, indicated a delayed invasion. He departed for Germany on June 4 to celebrate his wife's birthday on June 6. This decision would prove catastrophic. Colonel Professor Walter Stobe, the Luftwaffe chief meteorologist in Paris, had actually made accurate weather predictions. However, his advice for German officers to relax due to bad weather was largely heeded. By Monday, June 5, one wing of 124 Luftwaffe Day fighter planes began moving back from the coast. Hitler, meanwhile, was at his Berchtesgaden retreat, napping, unaware of the impending storm. The French resistance network, a sophisticated and courageous underground operating with extreme secrecy, now played a pivotal role. On Monday, June 5 at 6:30 p.m., the BBC broadcasted a coded message read by Douglas Ritchie, the voice of Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. There now exists in these broadcasts a direct channel of communications between the Supreme Commander and yourselves. Then came the first critical message, "It is hot in Suez." And a later message, "The dice are on the table," irrevocably activated the French resistance's sabotage plans. Across Normandy, Station Master Albert Orgay prepared to destroy water pumps and smash steam injectors on locomotives. Cafe owner André Farine led a team to cut the Cherbourg telephone cable, strangling Normandy's communications. Grocer Yves Gresselin prepared to dynamite railway lines. Jean Marion, a Grand Camp sector chief, cycled by soldiers emplacing guns, gathering vital intelligence under the guise of a construction worker. Meanwhile, German intelligence was also active. Lieutenant Colonel Helmuth Meyer, head of counterintelligence for the 15th Army, had 30 men working around the clock in a concrete bunker with sensitive radio equipment. They intercepted the first line of Paul Verlaine's Chanson d'automne, Les sanglots longs de violonde, the long sobs of the violins of autumn. The long sobs of the violins of autumn, this was part of a 2-part signal system devised by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of German intelligence, intended to provide a critical alert. The second part, Blessant mon cœur d'une langueur monotone, wound my heart with a monotonous languor, would signal invasion within 48 hours. The message was processed a little after 10:15 p.m., June 5th, and the German 15th Army was alerted. However, a critical miscommunication chain ensued. Jodl assumed Rundstedt had alerted Rommel. Rundstedt thought Rommel's HQ had alerted them. The sophisticated system failed to trigger a full-scale alert due to command friction and reliance on specific protocols. This critical German intelligence lapse, particularly the failure to alert the 7th Army, fundamentally altered the initial success of the Allied airborne landings. The night of June 5 turned into the early hours of Tuesday, June 6, 1944. A vast, dark armada of 5,000 ships converged on the Bay of Seine. It was 10 lanes wide, 20 miles across, with 702 warships and 21 convoys bound for Omaha and Utah beaches. 38 British and Canadian convoys headed for Sword, Juno, and Gold beaches. In the skies above, 9,000 planes filled the darkness. Barrage balloons protected the ships. Squadrons of fighter planes provided air cover. Radar and radio antennae bristled from command ships. This was the unprecedented logistical achievement of Operation Overlord. At 12:15 a.m., June 6th, D-Day officially began for the airborne forces. Private Robert M. Murphy, an 82nd Airborne Pathfinder, landed in the garden of 60-year-old schoolmistress Madame Angé Levrault. He was dazed, but quickly switched on his marker light. 6 planer loads of British Pathfinders and 6 RAF bombers towing gliders had already jumped. Yet, the initial airborne assault was not seamless. Poor weather, flak, and pilot error scattered many units. 60% of all equipment was lost, including most radios, mortars, and ammunition. One entire battalion of 700 paratroopers was scattered over 50 miles of swampland. Major General Maxwell D. Taylor, commanding the 101st Airborne, would later wryly observe, "Never have so few been commanded by so many." The natural terrain itself became a death trap. Rommel's engineers had exploited the Douve and Murderate rivers, flooding over 12 square miles of the Cherbourg Peninsula. The flooded Dives Valley, a maze of ditches 7 feet deep and bottomed with sticky slime, became the primary unexpected killer of Allied paratroopers. Corporal Louis Milano landed on a beach with an ominous sign, Achtung Minen. Nearby, the last 11 men from his plane were drowning in the channel. Stay-Mir-Eglis, a communications hub, became an accidental inferno. A burning villa, combined with the accidental concentration of paratroopers, turned the town square into a deadly trap. Paratroopers were machine-gunned to death. One man, Private John Steele, famously dangled helplessly from the church steeple for more than 2 hours. The commander, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Krause, reacted poignantly to the dead paratroopers. Despite the chaos, individual acts of heroism and improvisation became critical. Brigadier Major John Howard's glider force, tasked with seizing the vital bridges over the Caen Canal and Orne River, crash-landed with precision. Within 15 minutes, the bridges were secured. Lance Corporal Edward Tappenden sent the success signal, ham and jam. Another critical objective was the Merville Coastal Battery. Planned saturation bombing by 100 Lancaster bombers was a complete failure. Not one bomb hit the battery. Lieutenant Colonel Terence Otway's 700-man battalion was reduced to just 150 soldiers after the scatter. Facing a formidable series of defenses with mines, anti-tank ditches and barbed wire, Otway's men, with Sten guns, grenades and Bangalore torpedoes, launched a tenacious improvisational assault. Despite overwhelming odds and the failure of supporting gliders, they silenced the critical battery. Lieutenant Mike Dowling's report. Battery taken as ordered, sir. Guns destroyed. On the German side, the initial reports were met with disbelief and paralysis. Major General Erich Marx received the first official report of paratrooper landings at 2:11 a.m. By 3 a.m., Major General Max Pemsel, 7th Army's Chief of Staff, was convinced the invasion was on, placing his army on the highest state of readiness. But higher command hesitated. Colonel General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations at Hitler's headquarters, was asleep. Admiral Karl Jesko von Puttkamer, Hitler's naval aide, decided not to wake the Führer, fearing nervous scenes. This critical delay in releasing panzer reserves would prove to be a significant strategic advantage for the Allies. Rommel himself, still absent, was completely forgotten in the confusion. Only Lieutenant Commander Heinrich Hoffmann, an E-boat commander with a flotilla of 3, raced to intercept the Allied fleet, a solitary, desperate act against an overwhelming force. Dawn broke on June 6th. Major Werner Pluskat, a German officer at a lonely vigil overlooking Omaha Beach, witnessed the impossible. At 6:15 a.m., a German soldier on horseback saw the fleet. Then, Pluskat himself, at 5:30 a.m., saw the ghostly armada. He initially scoffed at reports of 10,000 ships, but the sight convinced him this was the end for Germany. Thousands of planes filled the sky. The scale of the Allied naval bombardment was immense, a roaring storm of fire from 15-inch and 14-inch guns. Yet, Allied intelligence had drastically underestimated the German defences particularly the battle-tested 352nd Division at Omaha Beach. Bombing inaccuracies meant 329 bombers assigned to the Omaha area unloaded 13,000 bombs up to 3 miles inland, missing the beach defenses. At Omaha, the silence from German coastal defenses as Allied assault craft approached was unnerving, leading to a false sense of optimism. Then, at H-hour 6:30 a.m., German defenses unleashed their full fury. The beach was a killing ground. 8 concrete bunkers, 35 pillboxes, 4 batteries of artillery, 18 anti-tank guns, 6 mortar pits, 35 rocket launching sites, and 18 anti-tank guns sets. The amphibious tanks, designed to provide crucial initial fire support, were a catastrophic failure. Of 32 tanks allotted to the 1st Division's area, 27 foundered and sank in the rough seas. Demolition teams, vital for clearing obstacles, were scattered and delayed. Engineers cleared only 5.5 paths out of 16 planned. One entire company at Dog Green was put out of action within the first few minutes. Less than a third of men survived the walk to the beach. Private David Silver was caught in machine gun fire, his pack, clothing, and canteen riddled. Sergeant Regis McCloskey was forced to ignore drowning men as landing craft, tossing overboard rations and packs, struggled to stay afloat. Lieutenant J.G. Francis X. Riley was ordered to disembark the troops on time regardless of casualties. Bloody Omaha was a testament to the devastating reality of frontal assault against entrenched defenses. A different fortune awaited at Utah Beach. A lucky error placed troops almost 2,000 yards south of the planned area into an undefended sector. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, the only general to land with first-wave troops, made the critical decision to consolidate the landing on a single causeway. This maintained momentum and avoided a disastrous traffic jam. The near-unimpeded landing at Utah allowed for rapid exploitation of the beachhead. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Colonel James E. Rudder's 3 Ranger companies assaulted Point du Hoc, scaling 100-foot-high cliffs with rockets trailing ropes. German machine gun fire and rolling potato masher grenades met them. A navigational error sent the lead boat 3 miles east. The critical 7 a.m. deadline for a signal to bring in support forces passed without word. The intelligence was flawed. The battered bunkers atop Point du Hoc were empty. No heavy guns were there. By the end of the day, only 90 of the original 225 men were able to bear arms. The USS Corrie, a destroyer supporting the landings, fought a cat-and-mouse game against German gunners, maneuvering through knife-edged reefs. But then, it struck a submerged mine. The ship was thrown sideways out of the water, torn almost in half. The fur room and engine room flooded, scalding survivors to death. 13 men were dead or missing, 33 injured. The US Navy's only major D-Day loss. On the British and Canadian beaches, Gold, Juno, and Sword, Lieutenant General M.C. Dempsey's British Second Army faced their own challenges. Canadian forces, with a score to settle for the bloody losses at Dieppe, fought through pillboxes and trenches. Dodd Lovat's 1st Special Service Brigade commandos were famously serenaded by the eerie wailing of bagpipes, played by piper William Millin. Underwater obstacles, steel pylons, gates, hedgehogs, and concrete cones, studded with telemines, proved far more deadly than anticipated. Frogmen, 120 underwater demolition experts, struggled to cut gaps. Amphibious flail tanks, designed to detonate mines, provided crucial support. On Gold Beach, the 1st Hampshire Regiment fought through Lahamel, a stronghold of the German 352nd Division, suffering almost 200 casualties. Company Sergeant Major Stanley Hollis captured a pillbox single-handed. On Juno Beach, the Canadians faced some of the bloodiest fighting. They found 6 German prisoners with throats cut behind a dune, and 15 Canadians lying mangled from mines. Street fighting in Courcelles took nearly 2 hours. The German 716th Division, though described as tired and inferior, still put up fierce resistance. On Sword Beach, Allied Command's initial strategic miscalculations regarding German troop deployment critically endangered the effort. The 48th and 41st Commando units encountered unexpectedly heavy resistance at Langrune and Lyon-sur-Mer, creating a vital 6-mile-wide gap in the beachhead. This posed a severe threat of Rommel's tanks rolling up the British landings. Casualties for the 2nd East York Regiment were 200 within the first minutes. Yet, despite this brutal reality, a surprising spirit emerged. Some French civilians celebrated amidst the chaos, and some German soldiers were eager to surrender. The profound psychological impact on Allied troops, who were primed for unimaginable slaughter, found a surprisingly less catastrophic, though still bloody, reality in many sectors. The D-Day invasion was a monumental undertaking, a profound human event marked by individual acts of bravery, confusion, and fear, against the backdrop of a globally devastating conflict. The fog of war was a tangible reality, impacting decisions and amplifying the human cost. It was a day of unprecedented challenges, overcome by resilience, adaptation, and immense sacrifice, a turning point that irrevocably changed the course of the war. The sheer intensity of the Allied naval and air support that preceded the landings created immediate disarray. For soldiers like Private Aloysius Damski, a Pole conscripted into the German army, this initial bombardment was a terrifying reality. He, like many others, grappled with a desire to surrender, highlighting the complex ethnic makeup of the occupying forces. The Norway Scare, Hitler's conviction of an invasion in Scandinavia, had kept key German forces away, a critical misjudgment. This contributed to the myth of a unified German defense, which the accounts quickly debunked. Instead, a fragmented German command faced overwhelming Allied power. Major Werner Pluskat, a German officer behind Omaha Beach, witnessed scores of fighter planes flying back and forth just behind the bluffs, strafing everything that moved. All the while, naval gunfire was plowing up the area. His experience revealed the brutal reality of Allied air and naval bombardment. Private Wilhelm Voigt, a former Chicago resident trapped in Germany, listened to American voices on his radio unit, far from the front lines. Longing for home, his primitive Metox receiver could not bridge the vast chasm of war, only amplify his personal toll. Across the chaos, Wing Commander Joseph Pips Priller, the German fighter pilot, prepared for an audacious, almost suicidal solo attack. At 9 a.m. local time, 8 a.m. to Priller, he took off with only 2 FW-190s. He flew into the teeth of a fantastic fleet, hundreds of ships of every size and type, stretching endlessly, it seemed, all the way back across the channel. He dodged barrage balloons, a solitary, defiant act. His almost defiant courage, against such overwhelming odds, served as a stark symbol of the Luftwaffe's depleted state. His lone attack, amidst the chaos, epitomized the desperate and futile efforts of the German Air Force. A Canadian soldier, armed with a Sten gun, was a silent witness to this brief, unequal aerial ballet. Meanwhile, the battle for liberation was also fought covertly. Individuals like Jean Marion, French underground chief, communicated intelligence about a coastal gun, allowing the Allies to target it precisely. Guillaume Mercader, another intelligence chief in the Omaha Beach area, harbored suppressed hope and anticipation of liberation. The successful destruction of the French coastal artillery gun by an Allied destroyer was a testament to their critical, often overlooked role. The myth of solely military agency was dispelled by such efforts. Yet the invasion brought horrific repercussions for occupied populations. The Gestapo's brutal retaliation was swift and merciless. In Caen prison, Madame Amélie Le Chevalier awaited execution, her hope ignited by the news of the landings. But by late afternoon the news arrived, and 92 in all Frenchmen were executed. This chilling act, triggered by the news of the landings, highlighted that the fight was far from over. The persistence of German resistance, as seen in the brutal response in Caen prison, demonstrated that the myth of a swift, decisive German collapse was premature. Far from the immediate bloodshed, General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, grappled with the weight of command. He had even prepared a statement in case of failure. At 9:30 a.m., Eisenhower received initial positive reports. Then, at 9:33 a.m., the broadcast of the official D-Day communiqué, a shift from a prepared failure statement to a triumphant announcement, signified the critical success of the initial landings. At last, said the London Times in a D-Day editorial, the tension has broken. The invasion was indeed the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, marking the decisive opening of the Western Front. It would lead inevitably to the defeat of the Third Reich. Private First Class Leo Heroux, an American soldier fighting on Omaha Beach, and 19-year-old French civilian Anne-Marie Brooks, whose journey through the war-torn countryside highlights the disruption of everyday life. Their interwoven stories exemplify how the grand sweep of history can lead to deeply personal connections and new beginnings. Ferdi and Hagar, German soldiers captured and forced to clear mines they had planted, showed the immediate aftermath of combat. Major General Wilhelm Falli, a German general killed in an ambush sometime between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., was an early significant casualty, a symbol of German leadership caught off guard. The persistence of German resistance, as seen in the machine gun fire faced by Anne-Marie Brock, demonstrates the fight was far from over. The narratives from all sides illustrate the capacity of individuals to endure extreme hardship, find moments of humanity, and pursue freedom. Ultimately, D-Day irrevocably altered the lives of soldiers and civilians, forcing them to confront violence, loss, and the possibility of profound change. In 2 weeks, we'll be seeing your pals in Berlin, Fritz, a captured German soldier ironically remarked, hinting at the swift Allied advance anticipated, though the path ahead would be long and arduous. By then, it was too late. Ironically, Hitler seems to have been the only one who originally believed that the invasion would take place in Normandy.